Let's desire a disaster. Let's crave a catastrophe. And some of you are looking at me like I am crazy. I've seen that look before. It's usually from my wife, but I see it at church every now and then as well. Let me explain what I mean. Sometimes what seems like a disaster or is a disaster or a catastrophe can actually provide some really useful things or some good things. My favorite example personally is one that I'm a little uneasy about telling, and I need to be careful. I don't want to insult or offend anybody, but here's what I'm talking about. Back in 1999, I resigned for the second time. I had resigned in 1995, but agreed to continue preaching until we found somebody to take my place. And so in 99, I resigned again because we really had never gotten there. So we finally brought somebody else in to do the preaching, and it did not go well. Some of that, it just wasn't a good fit. The church was kind of in one place and the new preacher was somewhere else. Some of it was we had had the same preacher in place for nearly 9 years, and so there's always that tendency this is different. Anyway, whatever the reasons, it didn't go well, and within 4 months, he had already been encouraged to submit his resignation. Stayed a little longer than that until he found somewhere else to go. But during those few months when he was first here, people were leaving, families were leaving, people were unhappy, more families were planning to leave. It was just an awful time for the church. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't happy either. We had committed to staying here and trying to work with the church in whatever ways. But we were beginning to think maybe we're going to have to move somewhere else. I just don't know if we can do this. Here's the thing. When that was over, and not because I was involved, I think it would have been true whoever, but when I was asked to return as the preaching minister for the church in 1999, the next year was the most phenomenal year we have ever had at Williams Road. In the year 2000, I started back at the fall, September or so of 99, and in those months before the beginning of a new year, we adopted a 5-year plan, which we had never done before and have not really quite ever done in the same way since. And people just got on board. People said, yes, I want to get involved, I want to help. Folks were just so happy that things were going well again. And I've described this quite often. It was the best honeymoon period in ministry that I've ever had. Folks who weren't so happy with me before decided maybe I wasn't so bad. Anyway, things were going well, and in 2000, the church here grew by 17% in average attendance. 17%. Record. We've never had that kind of growth before or since, at least in any of the records that I have found. It was a great year, and the next two were a little slower in terms of growth, but not by much. I think 8 and 9% for the next 2 years. It was that time from 2000 to 2006 that the church here just really seemed to be on fire. We had it. Our youth group was booming. The church was booming. People were coming. Our attendance had grown to 196, I think was our peak average for the year 2006. It was just an unbelievable time, and it was fun, and I was having a blast. I think other people were enjoying things. Church was exciting. There were 16 to 18 teenagers baptized, not just teenagers, but largely teenagers baptized during one of those years. It was a fun time to be in ministry, and it was a fun time, I think, to be a part of this church. It happened because things had been disastrous, and I am convinced, maybe wrongly, but I am convinced that the negative things that came before were part of fueling the positive things that came after. So it may be strange to say sometimes a catastrophe or a disaster is good for us. It may be strange, but it's not new. If you go back to Scripture and you read the history of the early believers in the book of Acts, one of the places you'll probably notice is in Acts chapter 8, in verse 1. On that day, the day when Stephen was stoned, he was executed on the spot for his preaching. I've made some people angry every now and then preaching, but I don't think anybody's ever wanted to kill me, or at least they never acted on it if they did. On that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem. While folks were angry, they just went after everybody. And all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. Everybody except the apostles had to leave town, had to run. Godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him, but Saul began to destroy the church. This is Saul's heyday in persecuting the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off both men and women and put them in prison. It's a disastrous time for the church in Jerusalem. Everybody's had to leave. We're down to just the apostles. This guy Saul is out to get us. He's dragging people off to jail. Man, what an awful time. What a disaster. What a catastrophe. Verse 4. Those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went, which is a remarkable thing. You would think they'd be quiet wherever they went because they just saw somebody die and they're seeing people arrested and had to leave their homes. You'd think, well, we probably ought to just kind of be quiet, slip off over here to a new place and maybe nobody will notice. But they didn't stop. They were fired up and went everywhere sharing the message and making sure that new people, wherever they found their homes, were hearing the same message that others have. When you get to chapter 11, just a little bit later, there's a follow-up. Those who had been scattered by the persecution that broke out when Stephen was killed traveled as far as Phoenicia, Cyprus, and Antioch, spreading the word. Their catastrophe, their disaster, led to a surge in evangelism and teaching and reaching out. Sometimes when you talk about getting fired up, maybe we need a disaster. Maybe we need a catastrophe, a crisis. Here's the strangely bizarre good news. We have one. We are living in a pandemic, probably one of the oddest times and the strangest things that's ever happened to the church. We went for 12 weeks not meeting together in person at all. We had to suddenly shift to doing online stuff. And we're still doing hybrid where some of us are in person and some of us are following a live stream. It would be easy to think, man, this is just awful. And there's some things that have been tough about it. But what if the catastrophe is also the opportunity? What if there are things about this current crisis that are opening doors for us, that are giving us opportunity for renewed growth, or maybe just renewed enthusiasm? I suspect we will appreciate being together in person in church in the next year much more than we did before Corona came. Not having it probably makes us appreciate having it. Here's your challenge today in the comments. What are some things you can think of that might be good things, things that'll fuel the fire that may come from the pandemic and the current crisis? Think about that a little bit. Look at it. I have some ideas about some things that may come out of that, but I'd love to hear what you think. I'll toss some of mine in there, and we'll get to some of mine later. Right now, what do you think? How can this catastrophe that seems so difficult for us actually lead to some good things and some opportunities and maybe some fueling of the fire for us? I look forward to seeing what you have to say.